Alright, so let's talk about Scalar 2.3. It's really been enhanced, and the upgrades, free upgrades, are great. I've rewatched a lot of the videos, learned a few new things, and there are a few things that I hopefully can explain to some users that may have had the same problems I have had of understanding certain switches and abilities in the program. Another thing is I'm going to talk about my suggestions for the future for Scalar, how it could be enhanced, how I set it up for a multi-track operation, and little bits and pieces of what I think might be helpful beyond what David has done in his excellent videos. And I highly suggest that everybody go to School of Synthesis YouTube channel, watch his videos 2 or 3 times. They explain all the little bits of what you can do in here, and I'm not going to go over that again because he does a great job at that. And he also puts out new videos as new capabilities appear in the program. So let's start out with some of my thoughts about Scalar used in a multi-scalar, multi-track situation. And today we're going to listen to the Noir piano as a sound set, and that's what you'll be hearing. So when I play the keyboard, you're hearing Noir. There are a bunch of great new sounds built into the program, and they keep adding more and more. Generally I turn that off because I like to have more control over my sounds, but they're really great in providing some super sounds so that it's an all-in-one package if you want to be a songwriter and create in this one package. But as a rule, when I'm setting things up for a multi-track setup, because more and more people are discovering Scalar, and many of them are using Scalar on every track or all their creative idea tracks. And since Scalar is fairly light on CPU, it hasn't been an issue for me. I often have it on 4 or 5 tracks. So what I'll do is when I start up a session, by default I'll have internal sounds turned off. I'll turn off the live audio detection to save CPU. I'll resize the interface as small as it will go. And often I'll have to stack 4 or 5 on top of one another, and we'll talk about that, some ideas about that. But another thing I'll do is I'll check the beats. If I'm going to have to drag out some of the chords into my DAW, the size of those chords, they could be short staccato notes. If you turn this beats onto half a beat, they'll be dragged out like 1/8 notes or quarter notes. But if you turn it onto 4-beat chord duration, when I pull in a chord into my DAW, it will be a full bar length. It'll be a full chord. So that's, I'll keep that in mind for my session. And also, as one of my viewers pointed out, and I forgot because I'd mentioned this before about the sync tab, if you're going to have 4 or 5 scalars going, why not use sync, where you can, when you change the scale, you can change the scale to all of them just by selecting your scale button here, and it will show you all the scalars in your session, and you can push the bar down here and sync them all. On that point though, with everybody using Scalar a lot and many using it on several tracks, one of my thoughts for the future would to be add another button down here, and that would be Scalar multi-track. And in that case, or multi-session or multi-track view button. So if you push that, it will downsize, just like native instruments. You can have different sizes for what you're working with, and you can have small views, large views. I would like a compact view which has just the essential buttons for changing all your scalars, most important things at once. So if I wanted to change 5 scalars at once, I would go to my multi-track view, which would make it a small compact view. And besides, I would have the chord change buttons in here, and right next to it, without having to go into this button and then into session and then into sync, I would just like to have sync all to my new key. So if I'm changing it to D, I just push a button that would be right next to it saying sync all scalars to D, click. Now they're all in the scale of D, or the key of D, and same thing with the scale. And so you could just almost instantly change all your scalars to change keys and scales as you're going. That would be so handy. All right, so having said that, let's pick a scale here. Let's go with D major. And we're pretty much in our default setup here. Let's see if there's something else I wanted to... we're going to talk about the performance, some of the capabilities in the performance section. And to do that, I'm going to just start with this default view, no performance on, but I'm going to go to keys lock and turn on chord extensions. Most of us understand at this point how scalar can filter out bad notes that aren't in the scale. So if I set it to D major, I know that I can play my piano and it won't play any notes that aren't in the scale that I set here when I have key lock on. But I don't think everybody understands chord notes feature. And if I just go back to scale only, we know the default views. We know the scale notes view. But the chord notes and the chord extensions is something that maybe needs a little more explaining. At least it took me a while to understand exactly what's going on. So if I go to chord notes or chord extensions, the interface changes. And now I have these little green tabs at the bottom. I have a new little work area here, space. And if I don't have performance turned on yet, I don't need that turned on. So I have a left-hand side and a right-hand melody area. So this will input chords. This will be the chord area. And this will be my melody playing area on my keyboard. So right now, nothing will happen, like you won't see any benefit. When I change chords, nothing's happening to my melody playing on the right. But as soon as I bind it, so if I take these chords down here, because I'm in D major, and drag them down here, now I have the capability, or I could have bound that section right up here, but generally I turn it down and bring them down into the edit view. But say now we bind this area, we see these chords now are bound to these keys here and have turned gray. Now I'm going to get the benefit of being in chord extensions mode, or just chord note mode. So now what happens? What's the difference now? Now the difference is when I press down a key, I'm playing a whole chord, right? I don't have to use my whole hand. And that can be good or bad. If you're used to having chord shapes in your left hand, that can be a little bit awkward. Some people are so used to making their chord shapes in their left hand, it's actually harder just to make a chord, press a chord with one button. But regardless, now I just press one button on my keyboard and I get the chords played out. Okay, and that's great. We know about that. But the benefit now, with my right hand, in this green play area here, and you got to see, you have to look down here where I'm actually playing on the keyboard, is lit up with the little green tabs. It's sending my notes somewhere else up here because they're affected by the chord. So now I'm getting the benefits of having a chord, and when I play in the right hand, I'm getting it will change as I change chords. So what's happening here is my right hand melody is informed by the chord that I choose with my left hand, and it's keeping it in sync and playable with whatever chord that I'm playing on my left hand. So I'm getting a benefit of choosing a chord and having my right hand free melody conforming to the musical parts of that chord. So I'm going to simply hit the same three keys always on my right hand on the keyboard, and I'm going to not change them, but you're going to see the sounds they make, the notes they make are going to change as I change chords and go through the chords here on my left hand, okay? So I'll be playing the same three chord notes and watch the change automatically. So they change automatically, being informed musically by the chords on my left that I'm choosing. Okay, so that's kind of the first level beyond just keeping your playing in scale. Because just playing in scale isn't musical, it's just keeping you from making mistakes. It doesn't make you a dynamic piano player, it doesn't make you a creative piano player. But this is starting, these are the beginning tools to give us help to play piano. And then if you add a performance, and it will, play through by itself. So let's not go with melody, let's just start with a performance. So now, as I play a left-hand chord, now it's playing a little repeated little piece of MIDI that goes with that chord, right? And that's playing automatically. Now with my right hand, I can play the chord extensions that will go with that. And that is somewhat musical. That is keeping things, in tune. Okay, so that is another step up where now we have some different musical ideas being automatically played, and yet we can still control the melody somewhat dynamically with our right hand. And that's another step up to getting some creative ideas. All right, but what if we went even further than that? And here's where it starts to get really, really interesting, in my opinion. As I've stated, just having the ability to have scalar or native instruments, keyboards, keep you in scale, or Cubase keeping you in scale, that's one thing. But it's not musical, it's not dynamic, and it's not dynamically musical, and it's not creative from your point of view. You're using performances, and you're limited. You got one finger here, but you're not limited in the chords, but you're not playing them dynamically. And just to explain why there's such a huge difference in a dynamically played chord than just a chord that is, three notes plucked down automatically. There's a great feature in Scalar. If you go to click on one of these that you've chosen to bring into the editor, and if you right click, edit chord, you see all these tabs now, and they're saying that these chords are all live and to be edited. So if I click on E minor on the tab, you have to click on that little tab, it now shows me up here a chord, and when you just play it like a computer, it just on and off. They're gonna play, boom. Now that's not the chord play. That's the chord notes that a musician might choose, but that's not how a musician would dynamically play it. And Scalar's given us these great tools where, okay, I can actually go into velocity, and a real piano player might not play the low note here that high. It might be lower, so you can just drag it down, or just depending on where you click on here, they might play that note just, at a velocity of 45. The middle finger might be the strongest finger, the strongest dynamics in that. And the right one might be just very light, you know. It might be barely played. And now let's play it. We get a different feel there. We begin to get some feeling into that and some dynamics of how the player is actually playing it. And so that's what I'm talking about, going from, if we go back to the main view here, that's how we start to get into the dynamics of how a real player would play piano. So it's important so that when we're playing dynamically on the keyboard, we're not just pushing one key down and getting a computer-generated plop down of all the notes in that chord. We want to play it dynamically with our left hand, and we want to be in total control and be creative on our right hand, but we don't have the 10 years of musical theory that tells a real musician that when he plays, you know, the E minor chord, when he plays the E minor chord, a musician knows that, okay, my right hand have all these choices now what to do, right? He plays that E minor. The right hand already knows from 10 years of experience all the different options all the different notes he can now play to get a musical idea from that E minor chord that he's put down. And he does this all in real time in his brain as he's going about. But from a person who wants to play better using software, from our point of view, is that, okay, well, if we already know the E minor, and if we already know that I can spend time on my chords, before I even get into dynamically playing them, I can make them more dynamically, let's see, go back to the main here. If I go back to that E minor, like I've said, edit, and I've already dynamically enhanced each chord, right, in step time. And I can do this, so I can make all these chords way more realistic by fine-tuning. I can add to that chord, and you can subtract a note from that chord, so you have to get out of velocity mode, though. You go into note mode. So I can add to that. Any of the blue notes will be in that scale, right? So I can add now. Now I've made it even, I've added an 11th to that. And see how that just adds more depth? And then I can go back to velocity and I can say, oh, let's just add a little bit of that in there. And maybe this is too bright. Maybe I can take that down a bit. And so you totally can make your chord dynamic and more musical. Do exactly how you want it. And you can do it to all the chords in your song, right? Then we go back to the main, back to performance mode, right? So in step time, we've made all our chords dynamically interesting and musical. But now we're in actual play mode or performance mode, where we want these chords to be played in a really, let's say, musical way. I don't want to just play a chord and have the option on my right hand is just to play a note in scale or not, because that's not enough. And that's where I think programs like this can really take it to the next level now. What if instead of when I play a chord, because right now when I play a chord, even though we can dynamically set this up and make it musical, the chords that we're going to play and how they play, my right hand option is basically just play something with it or not, right? It's and the enhancement wasn't even on there, so you see the difference. So, okay, but my right hand is still only playing notes. What if you could have another button here, or a whole set of buttons that take this to a whole new level? So instead of when I play one note musically tied to this chord that we've enhanced, instead of just having the option just to play one note, I could have more options here and saying dynamic modulation of melody or something like that. And say I could have that on minimum, maximum, or medium, min, or high. Meaning that instead of just playing one note with that chord, it now will modulate between and play that automatically according to a speed that I set. So now I'm in total control of the chords, but I'm setting up automatic responses live as I play. And so instead of having just these set up as playable keys, they could be set up as playable modulating keys. So I play a chord, and when I play a key, it will play a key that is in a octave up from this chord, modulating between 2 octaves up. And it might just do that like this, just back and forth. But it does it in time to the tempo and to your chord, which is leading the way. Because just like a musician uses his chords to lead the freedom of his melody creation, the computer can do the same thing. It has the ability to do it as fast as you can manipulate the chords and play them. You can set up parameters to automatically give you more interesting melody play, well beyond just playing one note melody at a time. Even though that one note melody play is enhanced and controlled by the chord, we can go well beyond that. Just like a sample, the latest sample studios that are making sample libraries, the VSL, Berlin Strings, what have you, they've learned that, it's not enough just to have multi-velocity samples of a piano playing, but they've added dynamics for velocity. Now they're adding performance features, like when you play slower, it automatically gives you longer legatos. When you play faster, it's able to pick up and change the sample sets on the fly to give you more staccato notes, spiccato, staccato, and it changes dynamically how you're playing in real time. So you're no longer searching for key bindings while you're trying to play. It's done dynamically as the speed of your play, how hard you're playing, informs the sample sets of what you want. We can do exactly the same thing in something like Scalar. And it's amazing what you can do. I've done a lot of experiments with keyboards, and there are ways you can test some of this out, and it's just spectacular what you can do. And once you play with a dynamically, so far, I'm calling this something like ACL, kind of active chord leading. So you're using your chords to actively create lead lines or melodies. And I think they started to develop this in the Karma workstations in Korg, and they've stopped along the way and never really progressed. But I think it can be taken a lot further than that, because as I've found out, it really does make it so much more musical. And once you've played that way, it's just, you can't really go back. And it's nice to be able to come in and change scales, but you can go far beyond that. So that's what I'd like to see here. Along with the track view and the sync buttons that are, ready to go for multi-track, I would like to have, as part of the performance package, a whole new set of buttons that allow you to create melodies on the fly that are led by your dynamic chords. And also, I'd like the option where you don't necessarily have to put in, even though it seems intuitive to have one finger chord playing, when it's really hard for a piano player to go steps backwards. It helps the new player to a certain extent, but it kind of ends at that point. I think to go further would be to leave all these options here, but to have another option where you can actually dynamically play the chords in. And to make these play areas bigger. So right now, I don't know how many keys this are, maybe 60, maybe 50, I don't know. It would be nice to have an enhanced version where we're given a really large keyboard to work with as we dynamically play and perform. Maybe 88 keys would be great. If you could change that or have that in the options to have a larger keyboard, performance keyboard. And the ability to put in your own chord shapes is fundamental here, because you don't even really need to understand too much about chord shapes. Just train your hand to make different shapes. The scaler could keep those shapes into the scale so that, it could filter out bad choices. But what it will allow you to do is explore all the shapes possible for chords in this whole section down here. And if it was a bigger keyboard, you could go right down into the bass. And those shapes are going to drive the melody that is going to be enhanced with all kinds of dynamic upgrades and modulation, instead of just playing one key at a time, which you could still do, but you could turn on modulation so that it will step through an entire octave of whatever your chord is. So if I'm playing a chord down here, when I press a key up here, it's going to play an octave of that chord, and it's going to step through the notes of that octave. It'll do whatever note that is, it will step through it in time. And I can set that time fast or slow, and I can set any other musical parameters that I want when I press keys up here. I may just want to have it press down 2 notes, activate 2 musical notes when I press down 1 key here, according to the chord. Or I may want it to step through an entire flourish of an octave of what I'm playing down here. And there's all kinds of musical buttons here that you could have that could kick in according to how fast I'm playing, the tempo, the velocity, the style. So not only when you start scalar will you have the option to just have piano or guitar, you could have strings, you could have percussion, so that you're setting everything up for your performance. You're setting up dynamically your enhanced edited chords that are all customized, right? You're setting up the mode in which scalar is going to dynamically update your dynamic chord playing. So it will automatically set up for guitar players, or it will set up for keyboards, or for string playing. And it will kick in all these buttons according to what mode you're in. So I think that would go a long way for the future of dynamically playing performances. And then a really interesting thing happens if you add performances on top of that, or the ability to learn from performances. You'll find that as you're playing with dynamic chords driven in the scales according to rules set up in the genre that you want, like guitar playing, picking, or jazz, piano, or whatever. It's endless how far you could take this, right? But you could enter your scalar session saying, okay, I want to do piano playing in a jazz style, and then you click on maybe even some more options, tempo options, style options, and then you have endless amounts of chord shapes or patterns to choose from, and then you can edit those shapes or those chords and then have them play dynamically as you step through, as you play dynamically on the keyboard, or you could play live shapes with your hand and your melody would conform to all these live playing setups that you have here. So that's how I would like to, I hope in the future we can have some of these options, because right now if I'm programming in some of these options on a keyboard, there's limitations and you don't have all the options of your chords. So I think the Scalar team, which has such a good UI person or team on their UI, is doing such a great job. They could pull this off. And I think, a company that's offering such a great software at a good price point, continuously updating it with new capabilities, it's smoother than it's ever been. Even with performance on and so many things going on, I very rarely now have MIDI notes sticking. And so the software and the setup has really gotten so at a point where moving forward with some of these new ideas, I think the team could do it. So my review and thoughts on the Scalar program, Scalar 2.3 at this point, are, it's a must buy. You have to applaud the company for what they're doing. And hopefully some of these suggestions, may get some light bulbs going off, and if they're not working on it already. But I think if you enjoy playing piano and, when you turn on your, scale helpers to keep you in scale, I think everybody's realized that there's still a long way to go. And I think this is one way of getting there, where, the software is, and computers are really capable of dynamically reading what you want to do and forwardly linking that and leading you to make your own choices. Because it's great to listen to a performance, and there's really great ones in here. So if we play one, and that's a great musical idea, but I think the holy grail here is to play your own ideas in real time, dynamically and creatively, but have it controlled and not have to learn 10 or 20 years of theory. Because really, when you learn musical theory, it's just knowing what keys to press when. There's a lot more to it, but that's the theory behind it. The creativity is another thing. What you do with that knowledge is creativity. But the theory is just knowing what buttons to push when. And that can take a lot of time. But the computer, that's what a computer's made for, just like a calculator. It gives you the power to come up with new creative ideas, because you're not spending years just learning a bunch of theory of what buttons to press where. So I think this is, the computer's tailor-made to take theory and give it into the hands of people who just want to create music. So we'll see where this goes. Hope you enjoyed this video. It ended up being a long-winded video, but that's, it takes a while to explain a few things. So we'll see you in the next video.